TV lately. There's an outfit that's selling masks.
I imagine there's one or two of them.
That's a way to make money hand over fist.
Those are ready to go, and there's masks. We fitted them Friday night with the girls, and there's gloves. Right here.
Okay, yeah, I saw them. Thank you.
Yeah, well,
It's
you're
like we're ready to go.
They're ready to go.
All right, good deal.
I don't know if you saw them or not.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm glad that you're here for Sunday school. We have some tuning in by way of their computers, our tablets, our phones. And we have several that are here in the sanctuary this morning, scattered out here. They're in yon, still staying away from each other. Let me grab my Sunday school book. I mentioned that I'm not teaching the quarterly, but I am following the scripture reading suggested. So the scripture for today, which is session 3 for June the 21st, is Proverbs 3:21 through 35. So it finishes up the rest of chapter 3 that we began last week, which I'm calling my series Smart Living. I like the word smart. I think that anybody can be smart. That it takes all of the being intelligent, being educated, being observant, being a bright person or perceptive, and I think it combines all the qualities of those, and I think that being smart is about being wise, or perhaps vice versa. Today's lesson from the quarterly is compassion demonstrated. If I was wanting to give this lesson a separate or a subtopical title, though, I would call it the don'ts. He gets into the don'ts. We're going to look into those, but we're going to. It is difficult to pass Proverbs 3 verses 5 and 6 without giving one more mention of that. So we're going to do that at the beginning. So there is a method to my madness. We're going to be looking at from the verses, the concluding verses in chapter 3 today. And the author of our quarterly calls it Compassion Demonstrated. I think we still have a few quarterlies. If you'd like one, we're only on the third lesson in this part. I like to be smart. It's not so much that I like to be perceived as smart. I like to figure things out. I like to be able to see things and size things up. I like to weigh things like these scales. That's the way things fall out for me. That's the way they play up. I like Brother Dave Gardner, the old Southern comedian from many, many years ago. He talked about when he was going to explain something to someone, he says, "Let me cut it up for you." Well, I remember my mother used to cut things up on our plates so that we could handle them a little bit better. Even after we learned to use silverware, it helped to have things cut up. I remember, however, once I had the courage for some reason, I can't imagine it. I had the courage to go over to a little girl's house in our neighborhood of whom I was fond. And I went over there and they invited me for supper. I remember that, and I gladly accepted the invitation. Again, I don't remember what came over me to build up the courage to go there in the first place. I was so shy. But I went, and I know I was going to be, I had not thought ahead about table manners, but I knew that there was a certain way to behave, and lo and behold, they had a variety of different vegetables, but they also had pork chops. And I had a fork, and I was trying to cut that pork chop with my fork. And I wasn't having any luck. It was probably cooked just fine. It wasn't anything wrong with it, but I was making it look like it was made of stone. And I knew my face and ears were getting red, and I was at an impasse. Finally, my girlfriend's bigger brother leaned over to me and says, "You're going to have to pick that up and gnaw on it." So evidently I took that as permission. I like to have things cut up, though. I like for things to be in pieces in smaller parts. That makes it for easier handling. I like for life to be in certain categories and piles and stacks. It very seldom is that way. But I think being smart is being able to size things up, to be able to measure things, to be able to look at things and discern a path. God says there is a pattern, there is a way. He says the Bible teaches us that He's leading us. He's showing us things. Things are connected. Things make sense most of the time. Now, there are a lot of things, even in God's world, that don't make sense to me, even today. And I wouldn't say that that's where faith comes in, because faith hits all of those parts. Let's look a little bit more at smart living today. I saw this. Someone was passing it about, and I thought, well, what a coincidence. Might not be a coincidence, because probably a number of people, just like you and I, are studying the Lifeway literature on Proverbs. So, we have there's a story in the Bible. This says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. And that does come from Proverbs 3:5 through 6. And it looks like just some stones stacked one upon another. There is an art. I suppose it probably has a fancy name. But I see people in videos often who will go to riverbanks or creek banks or streams, and they will just wade out into them and start taking stones that just happen to be underneath the surface. And they'll find a flat rock somewhere, and they'll stack them up 7, 8, 9, 10, 15, or 20 high in ways that seem impossible to me. Now, I believe that I could stack these 4 stones up without any problem, and no one would be compelled to give me, call me a rockologist, if that's what those people are, or a stackologist perhaps. What's that game with the little wooden blocks called Jenga?
Jenga.
There's another video out of Jenga where the blocks are huge. They're about that big, and there's a tower about 8 feet tall. There's a little boy about 2 or 3 years old, and he's pulling a block out. I don't guess anybody's paying attention to him. That thing fell right on his head. And I said, yeah, that looks about like the way I play Jenga. And I would never play Jenga with blocks that could cause a concussion. There is a story in the Old Testament, though, that has a name for that. And we sing a song about it. I'm going to ask Danny to be quiet until, I hope he has the answer, but do you know what the Bible calls that right there, that stack of rocks like that, as a memorial? And they talked about not stacking it, but raising it. Raising a stack of stones.
Yeah. They did that at the Jordan River.
What'd they call it?
I'm trying to remember the word.
I'm going to give you, the buzzer is just about to sound. I'm going to ask Danny to tell me what it is. Wait, Danny, wait. And we'll give you a new car. Or what do they call it?
Behind door number 2?
Well, an altar or?
Well, he don't know either. Well, I'm sorry. It's an Ebenezer.
It's an
It's an Ebenezer.
I raised my Ebenezer.
Y'all don't forget that, because it was a stack of stones that was a testimony, and so they left it there. As a matter of fact, when they went across Jordan and they were on dry land, they put a stack of stones in it was 12 stones, as a matter of fact, in the middle part of the river where it was dry, and then they did another one. And someone would say, what's a stack of stones for? And they said, well, there's another one just like it out there in the middle of that river, and they would have the opportunity to tell them the story. This is an Ebenezer. It's anything you and I raise in our lives, or anything that is prominently displayed in our lives, any evidence, it's a memorial, it's a statement. And it says something. It marks an occasion. And so here, whoever made this photograph said, I'm going to raise an Ebenezer. And I'm going to base it upon Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 through 6. The whole verse says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths. That's kind of like, how do you acknowledge God in your ways? Well, here's a simplistic way of looking at that. This is not, as I said, this is exemplary. This is an example. This is a simplistic example. It's like coming to a fork in the road, and acknowledging it says, when you come to the fork in the road, you don't go eeny, meeny, miny, moe. You don't necessarily talk to the standard bystanders or passers-by. When you come to a fork in the road, you look up to God and say, okay, God, which one of these paths do you want me to take? That's the way you're acknowledging God. You want me to go left or right? It's seeking God's direction. It's acknowledging God. Now, this book is about wisdom. Wisdom. But it's very important here that he doesn't say, get wisdom, become wise, and then trust it. Trust in wisdom. He never says to trust wisdom. He never says, trust you're smart. And as a matter of fact, there's a word there that I believe is really another one of those synonymous words for wisdom. It's the word understanding. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not to your own understanding. Now, even when we have wisdom from God, it then becomes our understanding. It's the way we look at things. It's the way we've decided or we have chosen to see something. So we're not supposed to even lean on that. He's saying, I'm not telling you, he says, be wise.
If we trust our own understanding, we could go wrong.
That's right. So he's never saying, here's a book about wisdom, and you should trust in wisdom. Because even Solomon was proclaimed to be the wisest man in the world. He's telling you, don't trust me. I'm telling you wise things. Don't trust me. He is saying, here are some wise advice. Don't trust the advice. In other words, you can follow it and consider it, employ it, follow it. But don't let that be what you're trusting in. He says, of all the things you know and however smart you become, trust in the Lord. He says that's the overriding basic thing. Now, here, starting with chapter 3, verse 21, and as he goes through, and this is a good way for instructing, teaching, or imparting information to other people. I think a part of learning and a part of experience, a part of growing older and becoming mature, something I'm going to talk about during the service today is that something that fathers should do, something that mothers should do, is teach their children and their grandchildren. So all through here, he's going to use a lot of different words to describe or to display or exemplify what wisdom is. And then he's going to define it off. This is what wisdom is. Now right here he says, have two goals, he says. Have two goals in life. Preachers do this a lot. Teachers do it a lot. We'll say, there are two kinds of people. Actually, literally there are about 7.5 billion different kinds of people. For teaching's sake, we'll say, we're thinking about, generally, there are two kinds of people. Maybe we'll say, there's 4 kinds of people. Well, he says, have two goals. Now, there are all different kinds of goals in life. One of them is sometimes just getting out of bed in the morning. I'm going to get out of bed. I'm going to go to work. I'm going to take this. So there are lots of goals. But he says, here's 2 goals to have. Have these 2. That is, he says, first of all, wisdom. That's one of your goals. Wisdom. That is, knowing and doing right. There's the definition for wisdom. Knowing and doing right. Now, he's making the assumption through here that people know what is right. There is something within us. Now, there seem to be people in the world who seem to have no natural knowledge of right and wrong. But generally speaking, human beings have a conscience. We have, even in our legal system, sometimes they will bring in great professional experts to determine if we're going to try this person, if we're going to judge this person, we first of all need to be able to determine, do they know the difference between right and wrong? And a lot of times, that will have to do with how they treat their case or how they judge that person. Because in our American legal system, we believe that everybody knows the difference between right and wrong. If we face someone or we find someone who seems not to know the difference between right and wrong, then we decide to make them an exception, and we want to treat them differently. We believe that if they do not know, they really do not know and cannot distinguish between right and wrong. This person did something, but they had no awareness at all that what they were doing was wrong. Then we're going to approach their case, we'll judge them differently. He says have two goals. Wisdom is knowing and doing right. If you know what's right and you don't do it, then one of the words that he would use in the book of Proverbs is foolish. Have two goals. First of all, wisdom, and secondly, common sense. Common sense. I have no idea in the world where the word horse sense came from. I've seen some very intelligent horses, some that they could paw the ground to complete the equations for math problems and so forth.
Yeah, like trigger.
Yeah, dancing horses, horses that could kneel, horses that could rear up on command, horses that could ride through barrels. I don't know what horse sense is, however, still. Common sense. He said, have two goals, wisdom and common sense. And wisdom and common sense seem to be very related as well. He says, don't let them slip away, for they fill you with living energy and bring you honor and respect. So wisdom and common sense. He says they will fill you with living energy. He says that's something that will energize you. It will propel you. It will excite you. It will inspire you. It gives you, he says, if it's a goal, and that's what you're working toward, it'll make you run steadfastly and enthusiastically toward the goal. He says it will bring you honor and respect. They keep you safe. He's talking about wisdom. Thomas says they will keep you safe from defeat and disaster and from stumbling off the trail. Remember I said last Sunday that he makes these great sweeping statements. And he's not saying that this kind of person lives a life where there's no failure or no disaster, where there's no time when he doesn't win the race. But he's saying, generally speaking, he said, you will find among winners, you will find among those who succeed, and you will find among those who prevail, those who get the job done, you will find they are people of wisdom and common sense. With them on guard, you can sleep without fear. You need not be afraid of disaster or the plots of wicked men, for the Lord is with you. He protects you. Now, you see, these are two things that God employs, wisdom and common sense. They are things that God distributes. So they're pretty close to God. They have a lot to do with God. They're associated with God. They're acquainted with God. They're in God's realm. They're in the realm of the godly. And so it makes good sense. Wisdom and common sense puts you in the world of God. God is there. He promises that. Now, here is where the lesson book picked up and started talking about being compassionate. But I think here are some don'ts. In the law, they are the thou shalt nots. One of the first words that a little baby learns is no. Because you worry about them. They're curious and they don't have a no. They see things they want to touch. They see things they want to taste. Places that they want to go. They have no wisdom. They haven't developed any common sense. And so don't touch that. Don't do that. And babies that can't talk, they soon understand what no means. They have to look up at you and they might even frown or fret. They might even try to respond to you in some way. They grow almost immediately not to like the word no, but it is something that we do not because we want to or wish them harm, but because we're protecting them from harm. So here are some don'ts. And there's always some good don'ts. Now, being wise is not following a list of do's and don'ts. but it is being aware of some things that we ought to avoid. Don't withhold payment of your debts. Don't say some other time if you can pay now. I heard a comedian several years ago talking about different kinds of people. And he said, here's a kind of person that they get their bills in, and just as soon as they get back from the mailbox with that bill, they sit down with that bill and they write a check and they pay that bill, put a stamp on it, and take it right back to the mailbox so it'll go out tomorrow. And then there's the kind of person who decides, well, I just now got this bill, I need to let it sit for a while. I need to let this ripen for a little while. And they often don't feel compelled to pay that bill until they get the same bill again with a little red bar across the top saying, we're going to shut you off if you don't pay this bill. And then they feel compelled. But here, he says, don't do that. Don't, whatever kind of person that is. He says, be the kind of person. He said, you don't have to pay it right now. But he says, don't put off if there is something that you owe someone. You know what? I don't know how much you listen to the radio. There's a very common radio commercial that is advertising a company that wants to help you. And this advertisement for this company runs 24 hours a day. I don't know how often during an hour, but I suspect I hear it 2 or 3 times during an hour. And it says, this is what the message says, I'm paraphrasing. Don't let the people that you owe money, don't let them fool you into thinking you got to pay it back. Because you don't. Call us and we'll show you how you do not have to pay people that you owe. They're just fooling you.
Well,
Now,
that's the gimmick. That's to get you to pay attention to the commercial.
well, and that actually is a company that has found ways where you can make a legal stand on bad law, actually, but you can make a legal stand where you can actually avoid paying your debts. There's a whole industry, and they want to show you how you don't have to pay your taxes, you don't have to pay your bills, if you're being sued, you don't have to pay. If you're due, you don't have to pay. And they want to show you how to use certain legal loopholes and dodges, and I believe it's completely, totally unethical. And we have developed a society today where there are people who make a living by borrowing money and never paying it back. We have a whole industry of a whole generation of people in our country today that are looking for a politician to elect who will say, I want to give you everything free. And if you owe a student loan or if you have borrowed money, you don't have to pay it back. We're going to fix it. If you'll vote for me, I'll make sure that you don't have to pay that back. I think my mom and daddy probably drilled something into me, and I learned something, especially my mother. My mother always paid her bills. She was the person who paid the bill just on the very day that she got it. Now, it bothered her later on in her life that she was unable to take care of her affairs, to have someone else take care. She would find out that she had a lady that stayed with her, a very precious lady and very diligent, but she wasn't one of those who believed that things ought to be handled right this minute. And that's okay. People ought to be a little bit laid back, and sometimes mother was a little bit wound a little bit too tight. But if she would find out that a bill had come in and it had not been taken out, the check had not been written and taken out of the mailbox, she would almost have a stroke. Well, I grew up in that, and if anybody wants to talk to me and say, I owe some money, what should I do? I always have the same advice. Pay it. Figure out a way. Get 2 jobs. Get 3 jobs like I've got. Do something. Sell buttons. I don't know whatever you've got to do, but if you owe somebody something, pay it. That's what he's saying right here. He says, you know what? That's the wise thing to do. That's the smart thing to do. Don't plot against your neighbor. He's trusting you. Don't get into, Do you know why he says that? Don't plot against your neighbor. He's trusting you. Now that seems like a presumptive statement, doesn't it? Do you know what he's implying here? Do you have an idea of why? How do you know he's trusting me? What would give you the impression? Do you know my neighbor? Can you make a sweeping statement about neighbors?
Well, it's kind of like they said to the Lord. They said, "Who is my neighbor?" And he told them the story of the Good Samaritan.
Yeah, you're taking the high road. He wouldn't live next door to you if he didn't trust you a little bit.
Yeah.
And so he lives next door to you. And so he's not, generally speaking, you wouldn't say, here it is, let's live here. Those look like some good people. Most time people think a little bit about where their kids are going to go to school and who their neighbors are and who is that lives down the road. He says, you know what? He wouldn't live next to you if he didn't trust you. He'd probably move somewhere else. He says, here's another don't get into needless fights. Needless fights. These days, someone say, well, why are you fighting? Well, I need a TV. I need a big screen TV. That's why. Or why are you fighting? Well, I need a microwave oven. That doesn't sound like a good reason for fighting. Why are you fighting and writing? Well, I need, there's some things I need to carry and put in the trunk of my car. Don't envy violent men. When he says something like that, I know that there are sometimes people who look at criminals or they look at the violent and they say, oh, I wish I had what they have. I wish that looks like they have rings on their fingers and they have big screen TVs in the trunk of their car. No, he said, I've never looked at the possessions of violent men and said, I wish I had that. Don't envy violent men. Don't copy their ways. The biggest thing about being a part of a gang or a mob or a group of unruly people is that we're just copying what the person next to us does. I never want to get into a situation where I'm just doing what the people in front of me are doing. That why are you doing that? Well, I started that early in life. I would say to my parents, well, everybody's going swimming. My mom and dad were never very impressed with what everybody was doing. And I found out in my house, I don't think I ever tried that a lot of times because it seems like every time I tried it, it got shot down. I believe if my mom and daddy found out that everybody was doing it, that was a pretty good reason right there for me not to be able to do it. Can I go to the party? Everybody's going to be able to be there. Well, if everybody's going to be there, except you, don't envy violent men, don't copy their ways. For such men are an abomination to the Lord. But he gives his friendship to the godly. The word abomination is one of the strongest words in the Bible that is used to say how much God disapproves of something. It's something that God has marked off limits. It's something that God has said, don't do that. It's God's biggest don't word is abomination. Now here are the last few verses. He says, the curse of God is on the wicked, but his blessing is upon the upright. There's one of those couplets. He says, here's the wicked, and here's the upright. This is the first time in my recollection that he uses the word upright to describe the righteous person or the believer, the one who's trusting in God. It kind of pictures that sneaky person as someone who is slumped forward or kind of hunched down. That person who is slinking around and creeping around in the dark. A person who holds his head up. A person who has his back straight. person who has his shoulders back is being described as someone who is upright. Someone who has, people who are ashamed. They hold their head down in shame. They let their shoulders collapse. It is a physical demeanor that is often like a tell. It is a giveaway. A person who is upright is different. The person who is wicked often has a conscience, and it makes them, even the wicked who have chosen wickedness, it makes them ashamed. And often it is reflected in their physical demeanor, in their body language. There's the curse of God. They're on God's bad side. They're against God. God has made pronouncements against that kind of behavior. And he says, you need to realize that when you're choosing the path of the wicked, you're choosing that your number one enemy is God. Paul said in Romans chapter 8, if God is for us, who can be against us? And here, the writer of Proverbs says, this is really smart. He says, if God's against you, he says, that is really, really bad. You've been cursed. The Lord mocks at mockers, but he helps the humble. Another couplet. This is what happens to mockers. This is what happens to the humble. Now, I believe it's important. Remember last week there was a passage, a verse that also says, God says, you're going to continue to do the don'ts. And he says, one of these days it's going to all fly up in your face. And he says, then I'm going to laugh at you. You're going to say, oh, help me. And God says, no, I'm going to laugh at you. Because you're getting what you were headed toward all along. Here is a symbol of God sitting back, and he's mocking them. He's laughing at them. He's holding them in derision. It's not just that he disapproves or he has a frowny face. He actually has a smile on his face. And he's saying, see there? The wise are promoted to honor, but fools are promoted to shame. It seems like we're all being lifted up. We're all being carried to something. He says the wise, they're being carried to a place of honor, but the fools, people who do the don'ts, people who don't do the do's, people who are not living smart, who do not have a smart lifestyle, who are not trusting in the Lord, he says, they're just going to, it's going to be shame. Now, there's even a purpose in shame. There is something in shame. There was a time, I remember, and it comes and goes. We can't say there was a time when, a lot of times we talk idealistically. There was a time when everything was better. Oh yes, we can say, I remember when police officers used to be respected, and we called them sir, and we acted in. There was a time when we loved police officers. Yes, well, back in the 1920s, there would be 4 or 5 police officers in the United States killed in each city almost every day. Al Capone was killing police officers and federal agents just like they were nobody. Bonnie and Clyde was out on the road killing federal officers and police officers and sheriffs and deputies. So we can't say, oh, I remember a time when I was a little boy when people respected the flag. Well, there were lots. There have been other times in our history. Things come and go, Things come and go. We can't say, oh, no. I remember when we used to have respect for our school teachers. I remember a time when both my daddy and his sister slapped the stew out of their school teacher. Just slapped them across the face in an altercation. So there have been, things come and go. If you think there was a time when everything was good and better and perfect, maybe there was in your life and in your little world. But listen, things come and go. Do you know around in 1919, here in the United States, that people were wearing masks and gloves, and they were quarantining each other all across our country because there was a plague. Yeah. Well, We can't say, oh, this has never happened before. Things like that kind of go around and come around. But as we look at these things, I remember people used to say, shame on you. If you ever said that to someone, shame on you. Shame on you. I don't think people blush or embarrassed often today. There may come a time again in the future where people gather about themselves a sense of deportment again, and the ship may right itself. There have been times in our nation's past where we did shameful things, and we're not ashamed of it. But even today, if someone who was my peer or someone who was senior to me, someone with whom I had respect, if they looked at me and sincerely said, shame on you, it would cut me to the heart, it cut me to the quick. Shame has a purpose and a place. So even here, a curse for the wicked and coming to do not honor but shame. Shame is something that God has instilled in our heart so that we might truly feel embarrassed about wrongdoing, that we might blush, that we might feel a tinge of guilt, and that would drive us not to just feeling badly, but making a commitment to change. I don't want to feel this way. And I hope that whenever I hurt or harm people, or whenever I disobey the Lord, I hope that there's a sense not just of human shame, but now in my life, a sense of the convicting power of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit saying, you're wrong and you need to change. There's sin, you need to repent. So I know that promotes me, that brings me to a place of honor. All right, God bless you all. Thank you for coming or tuning in. I appreciate you. And if you can stay to the service, then you're welcome to do that or to take a break and tune back in for that at 11 o'clock. We're celebrating Father's Day today, so I'm looking forward to